welcome to the Tea Club. And today we have a guest speaker named Andrew Noone, and he is going to talk about Bathsheba Spooner, a revolutionary murder conspiracy. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks to Leicester Senior Center for inviting me. I'll begin with a synopsis, followed by a few images. Then I'll address the most frequently asked questions. I'll do 2 short readings, then open up for questions. Bathsheba Spooner was the next to last of 7 children born to Timothy Ruggles and Bathsheba born Noone. Mrs. Ruggles had birthed 8 children from her first marriage. Her mother's roots were firmly planted in one of Cape Cod's oldest families. Her father was from Roxbury. Timothy was born in 1711, descendant of a family long involved in Massachusetts politics, but none enjoyed the status to which he would rise. A brigadier general in the French and Indian War, he had also served as Speaker of the House for 2 years. His reputation suffered dramatically when, as delegate to the Stamp Act Congress of 1765 in New York, he refused to join those protesting the actions of Parliament and King George III. Now firmly placed in the camp of those loyal to the king, he freely accepted the position of the Namus Counselor, one of the men who were appointed by the king's governor to the Upper Massachusetts House to do the king's bidding. Few men were as detested in Massachusetts in the year 1774. That year, he was banished from his new hometown of Hardwick, a town his ancestors had founded and he himself nurtured. He remained in British-controlled Boston until Evacuation Day, March 17, 1776, when he was removed with most Tories to Staten Island. In the meantime, daughter Bathsheba had married Joshua Spooner of Boston, a businessman slash land speculator slash lumber salesman. The couple settled in Brookfield, not far from nearby Hardwick. The marriage may have been an arranged one, a marriage which gossipers usually characterize as inharmonious. 16-year-old militiaman Ezra Ross of Topsfield, a native of Ipswich, left his hospital camp in 1777 in Peekskill, New York, to venture home. En route, he was taken in by Bathsheba and nursed back to health. He returned to Topsfield, then headed west again that fall to join what would become the Battle of Saratoga. The British had hoped to cut New England off from the remaining 9 colonies, General Burgoyne's troops heading south to meet up with General Howe's troops heading north. It was not to be. Howe instead focused on Philadelphia, leaving Burgoyne to fend off the increasing masses of American troops north of Albany. His entire army surrendered to American General Gates. Marched to Boston, the British POWs were quartered in Cambridge and Charleston. Both Sergeant James Buchanan and Private William Brooks managed to escape, not a difficult task, and likely met each other in Worcester for the first time. Now February 1778, the men were apparently headed to Springfield for work, when during a fierce snowstorm, they were called into the Spooner home. They remained there for the next few weeks, Bathsheba plotting her husband's murder with them. In the meantime, young Ezra Ross, just having attempted to poison Mr. Spooner, left with him to prepare his Princeton property, soon to be handed over to Spooner's brother. Ross never made it to Princeton, apparently borrowing Spooner's horse to return to Topsfield. All rendezvoused in Brookfield the evening of March 1st, 1778. It is unclear if their meeting was coincidental or arranged. Having dined with a friend and his wife, Joshua returned home alone through the snow and was assaulted at his well, beaten to death, and thrown in while his wife finished eating her dinner. The clothes he wore and those from his chamber, along with his cash, were distributed among the 3 men who fled on horseback and foot. All were arrested in Worcester the next day. The trial took place in late April. Abraham Lincoln's distant cousin as defense attorney, Robert Tree Payne, a signer of the Declaration, as prosecutor, in a trial organized by acting Governor John Hancock. With the trial lasting just over a day, all were found guilty. The date of execution was originally set for early June, but the 4 received a stay until July 2nd. Bathsheba claimed pregnancy. The officials in Boston allowed an exam to be done, proving that she was not with child. She insisted. A second exam, not authorized, instead confirmed her pregnancy, but the Boston authorities would not relent. Despite an informal third exam proving her right, her execution date was not changed. On June 10th, Abigail Adams wrote to her son John Quincy with his father in Paris. The modern history of our own times furnishes as black a list of crimes as can be paralleled in ancient time, even if going back to Nero, Caligula, or Cesare Borgia. All 4 accomplices were hanged in Worcester on July 2nd. An autopsy requested by Bathsheba confirmed her pregnancy of 5 months with a male child. Timothy Ruggles eventually found his way to Nova Scotia, where, as a loyal servant to the crown, he was granted a multi-hundred-acre estate, which he fostered as he had his legendary estate in Hardwick. His wife chose to stay behind in Massachusetts with their son. Timothy died in 1795 and was buried near his home in Nova Scotia. To this day, the burial site in Green Hill Park of Bathsheba and her unborn son has never been located. It remains one of Worcester County's favorite mysteries. So a few images. This is Timothy Ruggles, Bathsheba's father. This is the only image we have of him. It's actually a reproduction of the original. This is courtesy of the Library of Congress. This is Timothy's estate in Hardwick, courtesy of the Worcester Art Museum. It was painted by a relative of his from Connecticut. The home is on the right. The home on the left was added for artistic purposes to balance the composition. It's not there. You can barely see it. Just see in the front doorway here, there's a cleric dressed in red. Timothy was a Congregationalist, which was unusual for loyalists. Most loyalists were Anglican. So why is an Anglican bishop visiting him? We had many friends, obviously, who were Anglicans, being loyalists. You can't see who you are. Or in the top right window, there's a 12-year-old girl leaning out the window. Could very well be Bathsheba. You wrote the right time. Nothing survives of the property in Hardwick except for a few field stones, like the stone wall, and I think, ironically, given the rest of the story, I think the well also survives. Early 19th century print of Staten Island. This is where Timothy Ruggles and most Tories from New England had been exiled to. John Trumbull's The Battle of Saratoga. Look familiar to anybody? It's in the Rotunda in Washington, Congress. This was painted 40 years after the fact, so it's kind of fanciful. It wasn't quite this elegant looking, but Burgoyne on the left, this is when you two gates in the center, where George Washington in the middle there. And this was the last battle site of the 3 murders. Schooner Well in Brookfield, if you know Brookfield at all, at the center, Route 62, to the right. It's about a third of a mile on the left-hand side. This was put up by the Brookfield Bicentennial Commission, obviously in 1976. Nothing survives of the buildings. The home came down probably sometime in the 19th century. There's a photograph in the Worcester Telegram of people examining the well. In the background, you see the barn standing. And that photo's from the 1920s, but the barn looks really rickety. The men had spent several nights there before the murder of the British men. I'm guessing the barn came down 1930s, 1940s. So all that survives today is the well, and the well cap is only about this big. You know, we have the stereotype of all men in the 18th century were 3 feet tall and weighed 45 pounds. It's not true. How did they get an adult male into that well cap? And a year and a half ago, I spoke in Brookfield, and the current owner of the property said to me, no, over the years they had not reduced the size of the well. That's the original size. So it's a mystery how they managed to get his body down there. Also, after a snowstorm, they weren't breaking bones over. So, very strange. This is Joshua's tombstone in Brookfield Cemetery. As you enter the cemetery, or a third of a mile from the murder site, to the right of the gate is the stone. His son's stone is just 2 stones to the right. The tombstone was not put in until 20 years after his death. I'm guessing that was to discourage curiosity seekers.
Say that again, please.
The stone was put in 20 years after he died. Look familiar to anybody? Any Cape visitors? This is Sandwich Center. If you're in Sandwich Center, and you look to the left, there's a very pretty pond. This building is facing the pond. This is Bathsheba's birthplace. The Newcomb Tavern. Her grandparents built the home. They were tavern keepers. Her parents were also tavern keepers. Her father was the leading attorney at the Cape, and he also worked the tavern, as she did. It's available for rental for $1,000 an evening. A little pricey. This is probably Worcester's most historic property, second Worcester County Courthouse. Originally in Lincoln Square, facing Lincoln Square from Belmont Street to the back left is the old new courthouse, which are now apartments. All of Worcester's courthouses were on that site since 1731. In 2002, they erected a new courthouse 4 blocks south of that. And like I said, they're now apartments. So this building stood on that same site. In 1800, Worcester, or a couple years before, decided they needed a new courthouse. They contacted Charles Bulfinch, who had just designed Boston's new State House. He was the architect of the moment to design it. They took the old courthouse part, moved it facing Green Street, very close to Polo Park. In the 1890s, as downtown Worcester developed, they dismantled it again and moved it 2 miles northwest to just beyond where the Antiquarian Society is at Park and Salisbury. The Bancroft Heights neighborhood, the elite neighborhood in the city, the new neighborhood. This is the only building that was brought to the site, and it's the first building on the site. In 1774, 4,600 farmers, including a few from Leicester, surrounded the building. That was half the adult male population of Worcester County at the time, believe it or not. And they forced the British judges out of the place of business. California historian Ray Raphael made the point 25 years ago, in many ways, this is where the American Revolution started. When you force a government out of its place of business and permanently take over the site, that's a revolution. I didn't say the Revolutionary War. We all know Lexington and Concord saw the first bullets flying. But in many ways, this could be argued as being the first site. Almost. A month earlier in Great Barrington, the same situation happened. They forced the judges out in the Berkshires. But in Great Barrington, the judges came back a month later. In Worcester, they stayed out permanently. In Barnstable, 2 weeks later, the same situation happened, and Barnstable kept them out permanently. But Worcester was the first permanently in the colonies. Exile, British from a place of business. Boston didn't do the same until St. Patrick's Day, 76, 14 months later. In 1778, you have the Bathsheba Scooter trial, which is not just important for its sensational nature. She was the first woman executed in the new United States. It's the first mass execution in the new United States. It's the most extensive court transcripts from the American 18th century. Prudence, who was a tavern keeper in Worcester, was likely the first African American to testify in the new United States. There's one more again. In 1781, does that name ring a bell? Worcester County, anybody? Walker was an enslaved man in Barry. He escaped from his brutal master, being aware that a year earlier, the Massachusetts Constitution declared slavery about all men free and equal in Massachusetts. He went to work as a free worker at a nearby farm. His old master caught up with him, beat him severely, dragged him back to his sawmill. Somehow he escaped. I imagine it was a negotiated escape. He went back to his free employer, who contacted Bathsheba's attorney, who decided over a series of 4 cases to make it a test case against slavery in Massachusetts. And in this courthouse, slavery was declared illegal. Sure.
What year?
1783. Began in 1781. Slavery was declared illegal by William Cushing of Scituate. He was later George Washington's Chief Justice. Making Massachusetts the first state in the country to declare slavery illegal in this building. Now, New York, Vermont will pipe in and say, no, we did it in 1777. Vermont, first of all, is not a state. And secondly, Vermont sent women at 18, men 21. And then Pennsylvania will chime in. No, we did it in 1780. No, same as Vermont. You declared women at age 18, men 21. Massachusetts here was the first one to declare no conditions. Finally, 1786, a big date in Massachusetts history, Shays Rebellion. Daniel Shays was a farmer from Petersham. He was one of, traditionally he's been described as the organizer of the entire Shays Rebellion spot. He was one of the leaders, but he and thousands of men from central and western Massachusetts, especially western, went to take over several courthouses in Massachusetts. They were protesting the seizure of their farms due to excessive taxation, which was paying for the revolution, which was the war that they themselves had fought in and had surrounded the Worcester courthouse earlier for it. So now instead of forcing out the British government, they're trying to force out the American government. They did not succeed. It also happened in Taunton, Northampton, Concord, Great Barrington, Sheffield also, Worcester, and most famously, anyone know where? In Springfield. Springfield, actually, 3 or 4 men were killed in a battle in Springfield. They were not that successful in taking over the courthouses. They did not take over the courthouse. Artemus Ward, who was George Washington's commander-in-chief for a couple of weeks before he took over in Cambridge, he was from Shrewsbury, he blocked the men from entering the building. They came back a couple other times unsuccessfully. The rebellion broke down after several months, and I think 3 of the men were executed in Boston. Ironically, Sam Adams said, let him hang. Sam Adams was actually the same old colonists a few years earlier. So again, all of this took place in this building. This is now a private home. In the 1950s, on the bottom, they took the doorway down and had to put a new doorway in. Thankfully, they saved the doorway. It's now facing the garden, because under that doorway, John Adams, Sam Adams, John Hancock, Bathsheba Spooner, Levi Lincoln, etc., all walked under that doorway. But it does survive. The courthouse is actually, the courtroom is actually a little bit back. Acting Governor John Hancock. This is courtesy of Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. John Hancock organized the trial. Hancock had a home at Lincoln Square in Worcester. Again, facing where the auditorium is, flipped to my back right was his home. It was actually his uncle's home. He inherited it. He also owned a 150-acre stretch of land between Lincoln Square and the Holden line. And I'm trying to picture 150 acres between, I guess if we're narrow, maybe half-acre strip that might go as far as Holden, possibly. But Stephen Salisbury bought that property from him a couple years later. We have a letter from Hancock a week, 6 days after the battles of Lexington and Concord. He's in Worcester with Sam Adams. He was hiding out from the British. Keep in mind that the British attacked Concord not just for the weaponry, they were after the spies. And Adams and Hancock were at the top of the list. They escaped from Buckland Tavern in Lexington, made their way to Worcester. Paul Revere may also have them with him. Paul Revere is not mentioned in the letter, but it's very likely he at least stopped by the property in Worcester. He had a trunk with him about this big, full of secret papers. We think Sam Adams destroyed all the papers. The trunk is still in the possession of the Worcester Historical Museum. If you've ever been to the Smithsonian, I don't know if this is true anymore. We used to have a doorway at the Smithsonian. This is John Hancock's doorway. Everybody assumed it was from his Boston property. Facing the new State House in Boston, to the left, that wing was added in the late 19th century. They knocked down John Hancock's house to build that, to the horror of Bostonians in the 1860s. That doorway has been restored recently. It's in a museum in Boston. I'm not sure which museum it's in. But the one in the Smithsonian is actually the Worcester doorway. People assume it's Boston. Levi Lincoln, courtesy of courtesy of the National Portrait Gallery. Lincoln was Bathsheba's defense counsel. He was from Hingham, like the president's family all trace their roots to Hingham, Massachusetts. He became governor of Massachusetts. His son also became governor. He also served as Thomas Jefferson's Attorney General, and for a month, briefly, as Secretary of State. He didn't like the job, didn't want it. James Madison took it over from him. His home stood, I should say his son's home stood on Elm Street in Worcester. You know where the Chancery building is? That's where the home was. Who's been to Sturbridge Village here? Most of you. Driving into the village, that beautiful, elegant, yellow building with the columns in front, that was his son's home. Okay? They dismantled it in Worcester in 1954 and moved it to Sturbridge Village. Had the country curtains for a while. But Abraham Lincoln, I had dinner there in 1848 when he spoke in Worcester at his cousin's home. This talk of bringing the building back to Worcester, what's that happening? To be honest, let's make it now. And of course, Lincoln Square in Worcester is actually named after him. Everybody assumes it's named after his cousin. This is Robert Treat Payne, courtesy of the Massachusetts Historical Society. Payne was the prosecutor in the case. Does the actor's name Treat Williams ring a bell to anybody? Yeah, sure. So Treat Williams, Robert Treat Payne, and that was his great cousin times 7. Sadly, he was killed in a motorcycle accident a year and a half ago. Yeah, in Vermont. Of course, Abigail Adams, courtesy of Massachusetts Historical Society. Few people were as astute politically in Massachusetts as Abigail Adams. So when I was writing the book, I said, with her voluminous letters and diary, she had to have written something. And I gave her that quote. After I, as I say also, she read all the newspapers. After I wrote the book, I discovered that Bathsheba was John Adams' second cousin. They had the same great-grandparents. So there's no question in my mind. She's referring to the murder in that letter to her son. Union Station, Worcester, 1911. The site of the execution, most likely, it's 99% sure this is where the execution took place. The other possibility was my back left, where the main post office is. There were also gallows there, but this was the most frequently used site. Also, this is only 500 feet to the north of the condo. So I'm guessing it's a spectacular event. This is where it took place. 5,000 turned out that day. Worcester had a population of 1,800. So that's like Boston for an execution, 2.5 million people turning out for an execution. The idea of how many were there that day. It sounds like a Hollywood scene, but it actually happened. It was a day in the low 90s, July 2nd. As the criminals are approaching the scaffold, a storm to end all storms breaks out. The nooses are flying, horses are baying, women are screaming and fainting at the base. They get to the scaffold, have nooses put around their necks, sun breaks out. Bathsheba had requested an autopsy. Her body was taken away for that. And she's buried to the back left. I'll get to that more in a minute. The two British soldiers, were buried under Union Station, under the scaffold, most likely. They're criminals, they're foreigners, and they have no money. So their bodies would have ended up under the scaffold. Scaffold down. Ezra Ross is the mystery one. He's from Topsfield, but it appears that his body was brought to Topsfield. You or I would have taken 12, 14 hours to get from Worcester to Topsfield in 1778. How would they get a body in that heat? What, 18, 19 hours? If they could procure ice in 1778, that would have lasted, 10 minutes? Straw, they might have packed the body in, maybe. Someone suggested to me recently that even in the Revolution, they were putting bodies in barrels of rum for long carriage. I never heard of that. I know in the Civil War they were doing that with formaldehyde and alcohol. So that's new for me in the Revolution. That's possibly how they got his body to Topsfield. But he was laid to rest in Topsfield alongside his minister of council. There's a marker there today. Green Hill Park in Worcester, colorized print from 1900, 1905. Green Hill Park was the estate of Mary Green and her husband Mary Ruggles Green. Her husband was Dr. John Green. John Green was probably the most highly regarded physician in Massachusetts at the time. Not the most famous to us. Otis and Warren haven't been involved with the Revolution. Their names are more famous to us. But Green is probably, again, the best regarded. So he and his wife, Bathsheba's favorite sister, this was their estate. As you know, they were originally from Malden and then made their way to Leicester. Family lived in Leicester for quite a while. And then finally in 1754, John left and set up his estate in Worcester's northeast section. The park grew eventually to be about 600-700 acres. It's about 400 now. So again, 99% sure, not 100%, but it's extremely likely that Bathsheba's sister took the body. She would not have been welcome at the Common. She was a disgraced character. They wouldn't bury there. Also, the Greens didn't have any family plot there, so where would she have gone? To her sister's estate. The mystery over the centuries is where could she be buried? No one knows where. She was buried in front of the home, which is somewhere here. The home is right here. It's my back. No, she's buried under the silo behind the property. No, she's buried in the golf course. The golf course is now back left. There have been 20, 25 different sites suggested. Keeping in mind that New England soil is very unkind to remains. The casket probably would have lasted 10 years. The bones, a few decades, and gone. So there'd be nothing left. I also doubt very much that the family would mark the site to keep the curiosity, get curious seekers away. Who knows? This is the State Vietnam Memorial. It was dedicated by John Kerry about 20 years ago in Green Hill Park. So it's back right to this over there. Okay. I show this because a friend of ours was the chief groundskeeper, actually her uncle, was the chief groundskeeper of Green Hill Park, and he suggested she's buried in the woods just behind this back way. But who knows? The other problem is that it's 2.5 centuries ago. Fields become forest, forest becomes fields. Where could she be? No, we'll probably never know. Just a little local trivia. John Hancock was also the man who authorized, actually gave the charter for Leicester Junior, which was the first junior college in the country. What inspired you to write this book? When my family bought our first home across the street from Green Hill Park, a friend came by for dinner a few weeks later. He reminded me of the infamous tale of Bathsheba. A lifelong student of Worcester's history, especially as a village during the Revolution, I wanted to learn more. This being the late 90s, besides a mid-19th century essay or two, rather any odd article or two, no full-scale study had ever been done. I decided that my first book would tackle a notorious episode. While in the middle of research, and with the book about 1/3 written, Deborah Nabs' book appeared. Well written and scholarly, I admired her contribution, yet I still hungered for a less academic approach, one which would comprehensively relate the details of the case. While nonfiction, I wanted to tell the story more like a novel, and I wanted to do more than just relate a true-to-life melodrama. Since the early 19th century, historians, poets, and other writers from eastern Massachusetts have been Boston-centric in their retelling of the colony's role in the Revolution, to the neglect of many other towns. Worcester's contribution to the conflict and the events leading up to the opening gunshot looms dramatically larger than the mere 1,800 residents of 1778. I chose the tale of Bathsheba and her murderous lovers as the frame upon which to reconstruct Worcester's significant role in the rebellion. Just a couple details of Worcester in the Revolution. January of 1775, 2 farmers were seen walking down what is now Bell Hill in Worcester toward the courthouse, kind of on a Saturday afternoon. The next day they were seen at what is now Lincoln Square, named for Bathsheba's attorney, and there were 2 farmers doing this, not typical farmer activity, with their sketchbooks. Of course, there were spies who had been sent by General Gage from Boston to map out the routes to Worcester. Worcester had cannon hidden behind its town meeting house. A week before Concord and Lexington, he sent another spy to double check the routes in and out of the town. All 4 men met in Boston, and they had to decide. Concord had more weaponry. Concord is 20 miles from Boston, and topographically, it's pretty much a straight shot. Last couple of miles are a little hilly, but generally pretty even. Worcester is 40 miles from Boston, the last 10 miles being all hills from Westboro west or beyond. And also, Gage confessed that he thought the Worcester Patriots were the craziest in Massachusetts. He saw what they did at the courthouse. In fact, they knocked wigs off the judges as they walked along a gauntlet what is now Main Street. He thought, with the soldiers, what would be our chances of seizing the cannon in Worcester, turning around, marching back to Boston? As you know, Concord was chosen. Concord, 20 miles away. When they marched back, several dozen were killed leaving Concord. So he thought it would be a massacre against the troops. So Concord was chosen. April 19th, the day of the battle. Sounds like the Hollywood scene. But a rider leaving Watertown on the same horse made it to Worcester, the longest single ride that day. Stopped at Worcester's town meeting house, where the city hall is now. Minutemen were gathering, rumors were flying around. Minutemen were gathering at the Common. He shouted, the battles of Lexington and Concord have begun. His horse collapsed and died. Next day, he got on a new horse, went to Leicester, obviously a new horse, made his way to Philadelphia. He traveled a total of 300 miles. His name is Israel Bissell of Windsor, Connecticut. Who's ever heard of Israel Bissell? Paul Revere only rode 13 miles that day. Was Bathsheba insane? Oh, I'm sorry, first. How did her father's notoriety contribute to this border's downfall? Brigadier General Timothy Ruggles, legendary attorney, judge, hero of the French and Indian War, and Speaker of the Massachusetts House, in 1765 made clear his devotion to the king when refusing to vote with the colony's delegation to New York in condemning the newly imposed stamp tax. Along with Governor Hutchinson, Ruggles became regarded as the Bay Colony's most notorious loyalist.
next to youngest Bathsheba, had apparently always been his favorite child. Now married to Bostonian Joshua Spooner in Brookfield, her isolation from her father, several miles distant, and nearly 70 miles from the colony's capital, likely only distressed a dynamic, erratic personality such as hers. Her father's removal to Staten Island, of course, only worsened the situation, further exacerbated by her own loyalist stance. Was Bathsheba insane? Playing armchair psychologist from nearly 2.5 centuries away is tenuous for a professional, for me impossible. We can only speculate, and the facts might lend themselves to characterizing Miss Spooner as imbalanced. She had a sharp temper and was involved sexually with at least 2 and more likely 5 men, none of whom were her husband. She freely welcomed 2 enemy POWs into her home, and on occasion, a handsome teenager in her husband's presence. Her actions were often erratic. She allowed her 2-year-old daughter to touch her husband's corpse. She jeopardized the future lives of her 3 surviving children. She lied incessantly. Would we be safe in assuming that she at least exhibited signs of a disordered personality? Although her attorney suggested insanity during the trial, it would take many more decades before such a defense would be admissible in a court of law. Was teenager Ezra Ross truly guilty, and of what? This is one of the hardest to answer, and the overall situation one of the most poignant of the saga. Age-wise, the 18th century freely condemned teenagers, but what exactly was his role? It appears that he had had no knowledge of the murderous March 1st plot before that date. He had spent many days before at his Topsfield home. Had Bathsheba sent him any letters while there? Given the slow pace of mail, it's unlikely. He turned up in Brookfield only hours before the murder, which he did discuss with the 2 British men and Bathsheba, and keeping in mind that weeks earlier he had tried to poison Spooner and had planned to try again before leaving for Topsfield. His background certainly did not incline the jury to consider his role more leniently. Point again, let's pass these around. A few days before the execution, Ezra Ross is sitting at the jail in Worcester, and next to him is Ebenezer Parkman. Ebenezer Parkman was a minister from Westboro. He's regarded as the most prolific minister of diarist of the Revolution, and he followed the case very closely. And he's interviewing Ezra Ross. And Ross, sitting next to Ross, is a woman who's 5 months pregnant, his girlfriend, Lucy McDonald. So he's a busy boy. But she was apparently staying at Beeman Tavern in West Boylston. If you know where the Congregational Church in West Boylston is, the brick church, back right, it's a very pretty red 18th century building, maroon colored. That's West Boylston Historical Society, Beeman Tavern. She stayed there apparently in the 1980s. I don't know why it wasn't discovered until the 1980s. They discovered on a back wall in the attic chalk drawings in a series of notches on the wall. Apparently she had been counting days to her boyfriend's execution, marking them off while she stayed in the tavern. And she did drawings of the execution after. She did drawings of Ezra Ross. We think Ezra Ross. We know one drawing is of Bathsheba Spooner, and the other one are of these 2 of the victims hanging from the scaffold. You can make an appointment to see them today, but here are 2 of the drawings. This one's of Bathsheba, and this is of the execution.
Who do they think was upstairs?
So Lucy McDonald, his girlfriend, was upstairs with
Lucy
McDonald from Topsfield. 2 short readings. The first one is a petition from Bathsheba. So keep in mind, the first exam has been authorized by Boston. If the exam was done, showing she's not with child. In this petition, she's insisting that she is. May it please your honor, with unfeigned gratitude, I acknowledge the favor you lately granted me a reprieve. I must beg leave once more, humbly to be at your feet, and to represent to you that though the jury of matrons that were appointed to examine into my case have not brought it in my favor, yet that I am absolutely certain of being in a pregnant state, and above 4 months advanced in it, and the infant I bear was lawfully begotten. I am earnestly desirous of being spared till I shall have been delivered of it. I must humbly address your honors, not understanding my great unworthiness, and take my deplorable case into your compassionate consideration. What I bear and already perceive to be animated is more of the fault of her who bears it, and has, I beg leave to say, a right to the existence which God has begun to give it. Your Honor's humane Christian principles, I am certain, must lead you to desire to preserve life rather than to destroy it. Suffer me, therefore, with all earnestness, to beseech your Honors to grant me such a further length of time, at least as that there may be the fairest and fullest opportunity to have the matter fully ascertained, and as in due time shall during my short continuance pray. The strangest line from this is, the infant I bear was lawfully begotten. Really? She hadn't had relations with her husband for at least a year previous. One audience member suggested that she was trying to cover her tracks legally, possibly, that if she had been allowed to deliver first, that the son may have had access to the estate. I don't know 18th century inheritance law. 3 children survived. 1 child died in infancy. Had this child survived, this would be number 4 of the survivors. They were wealthy families, the Spooners and the Ruggles, so there wasn't a state to consider. Maybe the state didn't want to get embroiled in that situation, I don't know. But it didn't happen. And lastly is a reading from the night of the murder. So Joshua Spooner is at the center of Brookfield enjoying dinner with his friend Dr. King and his wife. A lookout was set up by the parlor door window as Joshua was expected at any time. Bathsheba called into the kitchen for some supper for the men. Brooks and Buchanan took a seat near Ross, helping themselves to a bowl of flip. A few minutes later, Mrs. Stratton brought them dinner. At the center of town, Joshua was passing the evening amiably. He was, in the words of innkeeper Ephraim Cooley, pleasant and sociable, sharing a glass of wine with Dr. King and his wife after dinner. Dr. King testified that Spooner departed at the same time as he and his wife, well between 8 and 9 o'clock. The Kings, however they were traveling, unfortunately did not offer to accompany Spooner home. At the Spooners, according to the testimony of Sarah Stratton, Bathsheba took her dinner in the kitchen with a Mr. Gray and his partner. Men further identified simply as 2 boarders. Mysteriously, outside of the few mentions they received in the housekeeper's testimony, their names never reappeared. The second unnamed boarder retired once dinner was finished. In the parlor, Stratton served rum to Buchanan, Brooks, and Ross, who had been drinking for about 45 minutes, not including any alcohol they may have consumed prior to arriving in Brookfield. Each took a turn as a lookout. And I make a note in the book, the excessive alcoholic consumption in the 18th century. There was the pre-breakfast drink, the breakfast drink, the post-breakfast drink, the pre-lunch drink, the lunch drink, just drinking all day long. And I imagine the men involved in intensive labor they were involved in. It probably kept them going through the day. John Adams was the first to criticize the excessive drinking. As soon as he rolled out of bed in the morning, he had a hit of rum. So, I mean, it was pretty widespread. I read recently that 80% of murders committed in the United States today are committed by somebody around abusing one substance or another. So things haven't changed so much in 2 centuries. Spooner, in high and possibly intoxicated spirits, left Cooley's with no reason to suspect that this would be his final walk. As he had banished Buchanan and Brooks from his home 2 weeks earlier, he did not expect to see them ever again. He had also bid farewell to Ross at about the same time. Further, Spooner had never given any indication that he believed his wife wished him dead. The night was cold. Although only a short distance from his home, Spooner may have wished he had taken his horse. If he had, his evening might have turned out very differently. One of the conspirators saw Joshua approach. Brooks left the parlor to stand within what was referred to as the small gate entryway, which led into the kitchen. Before leaving the room, he picked up a foot-long log from the hearth. Joshua approached, the crunching snow the only sound disturbing the silence. Bathsheba remained in the kitchen, her children asleep by the fire. It was just before 9 o'clock, as Buchanan laid a robe, and then was the time for the devil to shew his power over them who had forsaken God. I'd be hanging at that point. Any questions?
She has a question.
I have a question on this. This one right here where there's an arrow.
Yep.
What's that
I
arrow?
had the same thought. No idea.
Okay, but
Yep.
that is an
It's just a computer arrow they photographed at that time.
Oh,
maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably the cursor.
Yeah.
And so that's a drawing of her?
Yeah. Chalk drawing.
Yeah.
men in the 18th century is probably limited to physical abuse by their definition then. But Joshua was always described as being this cranky old character. He was 3 years older than Bathsheba. Also, the only time we run across Joshua is when someone's about to steal from him, somebody's stealing from him, or somebody's about to kill him. How are you and I looking at a book if that's how we're being portrayed? Not very pleasant, I don't think. So I'm not sure what kind of character he really was like. It's certain to say that in many ways they deserved each other as for a happy marriage. So it seems.
And did any of the children live to be longer?
The children?
Yes.
Yeah, so Margaret Tufts, who was also another sister in Brookfield, she adopted the kids for a while. I read once like that they had been away to an uncle in Virginia for a while. I never verified that temporarily. Two of the men became Mr. Cousins' businessmen. One is buried in North Brookfield Cemetery, though. The other is buried next to the father. I'm not sure where the daughter is buried. She married a captain. She's the one who was declared hopelessly insane in 1858 before she died. What did that mean in the 19th century? Did it mean advanced Alzheimer's? Did it mean severe dementia? Did she suffer from bipolarity? Did her husband commit her to the institution? That happened also. So we'll never know. There's been a tradition of trying to trace insanity in the family. Bathsheba had an uncle who was insane. Her sister, her favorite sister, after taking the body, was declared temporarily insane. What favorite sister wouldn't be declared temporarily insane after that situation? Again, the daughter was called insane. In the strangest episode in the book, one day in Hardwick, her parents are sitting down to dinner, and they finished dinner, and the husband's comments, "It was a great meal," and the wife said, "I hope you enjoyed it. That was your favorite dog."
And who was the person who said that?
The wife. I bet she was mom.
She was
Her
mother.
mother. Legend or not true? We don't know.
But then, that was your favorite dog?
Dog. They just died on his dog.
So,
She's buried in Hardwick Cemetery.
so, being that the cat on the well is so small.
Right, I'll take that probably. Yeah.
Oh, about like this?
Yeah, well, it'll like that.
Okay, so how are they sure that he was put in there?
Yeah. Well, they found him the next day. So Bathsheba wakes up the next morning, turns to another servant of hers, who's probably her first lover, a Scottish servant, Alexander Cummings. And she says to him, "Where's Joshua? He's supposed to return from dinner last night. Could you go to Cooley's and check out what's up?" So she went down the street to Cooley's. Cooley's horrified. Got a posse together, returned to this wooded property. They found blood at the well in the snow, at the well base rather. And Stewart's had this, and they pulled the body out of the base of it.
And he was intact? Oh.
It was head first as well.
Hey,
At first, sure, they would have just stuffed him in.
I think we picked him up like this, right?
They
Like
would have
this.
just picked him up
Yeah.
and put him in. But the fact is that he got in there. But you know, not everybody was big and brawny. I mean, you know, the beds were only.
Right. He was average size. He was at least 5'7", probably. You know.
You think so?
Yeah, probably. That was the
Some
average.
of those beds, I mean, even like Andrew Jackson, his bed is
Right.
not even 5 feet long, I don't think.
Yeah. Many were small. It's like the same thing we say. Oh, everyone died early in growth. Oh, everyone died in the 40s. No. The reason so many children died that skews the average age. A lot of men and women with 80s and 90s quite good. Look at the founding fathers. I mean, those were old
Oh,
age.
I see,
you know.
yes. But he
So
could
it's
fit
the same
in
with
like-
body size that
He could fit in there, I guess. Well, I guess he did fit in.
Yeah, he did. They pulled him out. Yeah.
They broke his shoulders and stuff.
no, not necessarily.
No. If there was a snowstorm, not likely they'll break any bones. Not very likely.
That's what I mean. Look at that, way, look the ways
Verification
of
that you
women.
had all these affairs with all these people, or
Yeah,
that's
so,
hearsay?
right, at Walker's Tavern, one day, one of the men, one of the tavern keepers, she goes to the, at the tavern, Mr. Walker's Tavern, Mary Walker, the tavern keeper, she goes to the top story one day, and she said she found she and Buchanan together. That was from this 18th century, in bed together. Also, Ezra Ross testified and commented to the evidence apartment in the jail that he was, that back in November, Bathsheba asked him to defile her marriage bed. So she was having affairs with at least two. And she also, at the tavern in Worcester, Brooks, the other British soldier, is sitting in her lap. The uncommon thing in women in the 18th century, a man sitting in your lap in public, who's not your husband, it's even weirder. It's I was asked when your husband came there, but so what's going on with that? So it appears she was intimate with several men.
Is he?
Yeah. What's your guess? Why would the state, I always ask audiences, why would the state allow a 5-year-old woman to be executed, a pregnant woman to be executed?
Why not?
Was it just callous, you think, on the state's, on the colony's part?
Well, they're all men, for one thing.
Right.
So they're, you know, they don't like it that this is such a, you know, she was a real whore. Let's
And
face
she's a
it.
loyalist.
Yeah, oh yes, she's a loyalist. So I mean, they, for goodness sake, they were burning people at the, they were, you know, in Salem, they were burning.
Salem was just 8 years before, right?
They did it
Yeah,
because they executed her because they could.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't care that she was pregnant. She had a, look, I'm using the language. She had a bastard in her, right? They had no time for that.
Right. This is I
They were better than any of the, you know, they just thought she was.
This is the height of the revolution. Inflation's running 8 or 9 times beyond what ours is right now, believe it or not. Women are running estates, running farms. Men under 40 are essentially out of New England by and large. Everybody is stressed out. I think the state said, you had your chance. You had your physical exam, showed you weren't pregnant, and moving on with this.
Oh, that's right. If one exam said you're not pregnant, then we're gonna stick to that one. No
Exactly.
matter how many.
Well, that's
other
the irony. You would think a later exam would be the more verifiable one.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
But they don't care about that. They're sticking to that
Right.
first one that says she's not pregnant.
At the same time, to be devil's advocate, I'd like to believe they'll be as impartial as they possibly can.
Yeah, well, forget that.
Forget about it.
Not
Yeah.
impartial today. They were not impartial.
I mean, she was a beautiful woman, they admired her for that reason, maybe they would push them a little bit direction. Her father was well respected, hated, but certainly well respected among them. I don't know.